Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into the idea of success. What makes someone truly achieve great things? We're focusing on the sources behind the rise of Joe Flom, a legal giant, yeah? You've
Yeah.
probably heard the name Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher and Flom. It's this massive global law firm now. Big deals, mergers. But Flom himself, the last partner name added, he started out very differently. Poor kid. Brooklyn. His parents were immigrants, Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, worked in the garment industry, somehow got into Harvard Law, didn't even have a regular college degree, which is amazing in itself. But then he graduates and bam, all the big fancy Wall Street firms, they just shut the door on him. The usual story is, he just worked harder than everyone else. But is that really it? Let's unpack this.
Right, that classic rags to riches, self-made person narrative.
Yeah.
It's powerful, sure, but the source material we're looking at suggests it's, well, a lot more complicated than just grit. Flom obviously had talent and drive, plenty of it.
Yeah.
But we really need to look at the whole picture, the ecology around him. Success like his, it's rarely just one person. It's about the specific time, the place, the environment, and how all these factors lined up, sometimes turning what looked like disadvantages into, well, huge opportunities. It really challenges that simple sheer grit story.
Okay, let's start with lesson number one then. The importance of being Jewish, or maybe how adversity became an opportunity. Tell us about that initial struggle.
Flom applied to those big white shoe firms back in the late 1940s. He even said himself he felt like ungainly, awkward, a fat kid. And crucially, he was Jewish. That made him really uncomfortable interviewing downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up being one of only two in his whole Harvard law class without a job offer initially. And those white shoe firms, places like, say, Mudge Rose, they weren't just law firms as we think of them today. They were more like exclusive social clubs. They weren't just after smart lawyers. They wanted a specific kind of person. The sources are pretty clear. They looked for Nordic types, guys from the right schools, the right families, the right background.
Yeah.
They had this really strict idea of who was acceptable, and Flub just didn't fit on several counts, really.
It's kind of shocking how blatant the discrimination was back then. There's that story in the sources about Alexander Bickel, another brilliant Harvard guy, similar background to Flom.
Right, that story really nails it.
Yeah.
Bickel interviews, the partner basically says you're brilliant, but then immediately follows up with how limited the possibilities are for the firm to hire someone with Bickel's antecedents.
Antecedents, meaning his immigrant Jewish roots.
Exactly. It wasn't even subtle. It was a structural barrier, keeping a whole group of incredibly talented lawyers out of the really prestigious corporate work.
So, Flum and others like him, these outsiders, they couldn't get into the advising game. So when they started Skadden Arps, what kind of law did they do?
Flom's answer was pretty simple. Whatever came in the door.
Just anything.
Pretty much. And here's where it gets really interesting, where that disadvantage starts to flip. The establishment firms, the white shoe ones, they look down their noses at two specific types of legal work.
Okay, what were they?
First, litigation. Actually going to court, suing people, defending lawsuits. They thought it was messy, kind of unseemly, below them.
In the second?
Hostile corporate takeovers. This is key. Until maybe the 1970s, hostile takeovers were seen as completely scandalous. Not gentlemanly at all. It just wasn't done if you were part of the establishment.
Huh. Because today, that's huge money, right?
Oh, absolutely. But back then, it was about maintaining the existing corporate order, the decorum. So guys like Flom, outsiders, they had no fancy reputation to lose, no club membership they were protecting. They had zero problem specializing in this dirty work, particularly something called proxy fights.
Proxy fights. Those were the legal battles inside takeover attempts.
Exactly, the core legal maneuvering. And these fights often happened in this really intense adversarial setting they called the snake pit.
The snake pit sounds rough.
It was. Totally different from the calm Wall Street offices. Lawyers fighting tooth and nail over single ballots, sometimes working around the clock. It was aggressive, highly tactical. Flom basically spent 20 years mastering that kind of corporate combat.
Okay, so he builds up this expertise for 2 decades in an area the big firms won't touch, and then things change.
Massively. Starting in the 70s, really accelerating into the 80s, the whole corporate landscape shifts. Regulations eased up, money got cheaper, and companies realized, hey, maybe buying other companies aggressively is the way to grow.
So hostile takeovers went from scandalous to standard practice?
Pretty much. The amount of money involved in M&A mergers and acquisitions, it exploded, like 2,000% increase between the mid-70s and late 80s.
Wow. And suddenly, that niche skill set Flom was forced into because he was an outsider.
Was the only skill set that mattered on Wall Street. Skadden, Arps didn't need to play catch-up. They were already the experts. They had their 10,000 hours in, so to speak.
So that adversity, being excluded,
Yeah.
it directly led to their opportunity. It wasn't overcoming adversity. It was adversity becoming the advantage.
Precisely. So the specialized training they got because no one else wanted the job.
Okay, that timing of the economic shift is clearly vital. But the sources bring up a second huge factor, almost invisible, when these lawyers were born. Lesson 2, demographic luck.
Yeah, this one's fascinating. Let's look at two lawyers. Maurice Janklow, born 1902. Smart guy, lawyer. But he really struggled. Graduated right into the Great Depression, ended up doing tiny deals like title closings for $25.
Okay.
The economy just crushed his ambitions.
Okay.
Now, compare him to his son, Mort Janklow, who became super successful. Mort was born in the early 1930s. Same time as Joe Flom.
But wait, weren't they born into the Depression too? Wouldn't that be just as bad or worse?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it actually worked the other way around because of something called the demographic trough. Because of the Depression's hardship, birth rates in the U.S. absolutely plummeted. Births per 1,000 people dropped from almost 30 in 1915 down to under 19 by 1935.
So the generation born in the early 30s, like Flom and Mort Janklow,
Yeah.
it was just much smaller.
Significantly smaller than the generation before them and way smaller than the baby boomers who came after.
Okay, so what does being part of a small generation actually mean in practice?
It means less competition.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Think about schools. The number of kids went down, but the schools, the buildings, the infrastructure, that was already built for the larger generation before them.
So smaller class sizes, more attention.
Exactly. They weren't crammed into classrooms fighting for resources. And critically important, the quality of teaching was often sky high.
How so?
Because the Depression meant lots of incredibly smart, highly qualified people couldn't get jobs as, say, college professors. So where do they end up? Teaching in public high schools.
Wow. So this small generation accidentally got this amazing education because of the economic downturn.
Pretty much. And that advantage followed them. Think about college. Another lawyer from that era, Ted Friedman, mentioned he could go to City College basically for free or pay just $450 a year for the University of Michigan. Access was easier.
And jobs after graduation.
Same story. The economy was picking up post-war, but Flom's cohort was small. So factories, offices, they were looking for people. There was less competition for entry-level spots. Friedman talked about getting high-paying construction jobs easily, working at the Ford plant. Demand was high, supply was low.
So being born in the early 1930s, it was like hitting the demographic jackpot if you wanted to be a lawyer in New York.
It really seems like it was the magic time. You get the benefit of this small generation, better schooling, easier access to college, less competition for jobs, and then, crucially, you hit your professional prime maybe around age 40, right when the hostile takeover boom starts in the 1970s.
Perfect timing. They had the expertise from Lesson 1, and now we see they had minimal competition from their own age group because of Lesson 2. Their birth year was a massive hidden advantage.
Absolutely fundamental.
Okay, let's move to the third piece, Lesson 3. This one's about family background, specifically their parents' world, the garment industry, and the idea of meaningful work.
Right. This connects back to Flom's parents, remember. His father sewed shoulder pads. This wasn't uncommon. Many of these successful lawyers came from families involved in the New York garment trade. The source uses the example of Louis and Regina Borgenichts, Jewish immigrants who came over in 1889. Louis had this insight about ready-made clothes, specifically for kids. Regina had the actual tailoring skills.
And they started small.
Tiny. Making children's aprons. They sold like 40 aprons their first morning out. It shows that entrepreneurial spark.
And this was common for Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, having these kinds of skills.
Often, yes. Unlike some other immigrant groups whose skills were maybe more agricultural, many Eastern European Jews arrived with trades perfect for the city. Tailoring, dressmaking, things like that. It gave them a foothold. Plus, the garment industry itself in New York was huge. The biggest industry in the city, incredibly vibrant, and really entrepreneurial. You didn't need vast amounts of capital to start. Maybe $50 for a sewing machine or two.
So it offered a pathway. But the source talks about meaningful work. What does that mean here?
It means the work had certain qualities. It wasn't just drudgery. It had complexity. You had to figure things out, manage materials, maybe customers. It had autonomy. You often worked for yourself or in small shops making decisions. And crucially, there was a clear connection between effort and reward. You worked hard, you made more aprons, you sold more, you saw the results directly. It wasn't like being a tiny cog in a giant anonymous factory.
Okay, I see. So How did this meaningful work of the parents translate into an advantage for the children, like Flom?
It wasn't necessarily about inheriting wealth. It was about inheriting a mindset. The kids watched their parents figure things out, take risks, use their wits and skills to, as the source says, shape the world to their desires.
They learned lessons about initiative, about being assertive.
Exactly. They saw problem solving, negotiation, maybe even a certain kind of necessary scrappiness or aggression needed to survive and thrive in a competitive business. Think about it, that kind of assertive, quick-thinking, tactical mindset.
It sounds like perfect preparation for the legal snake pit we talked about earlier.
Precisely. The skills needed to navigate the garment trade weren't that different from the skills needed to win a proxy fight. It was a cultural inheritance of assertiveness.
So the three lessons tie together. Being an outsider forced them into the right niche, litigation takeovers. Being born at the right time meant less competition and better resources. And their parents' work gave them the cultural tools, the mindset to succeed in that niche.
And the pattern is striking. The source points out Skadden's big rival, Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen Katz. Another legal powerhouse built by outsiders. All four founding partners.
Let me guess.
You got it. Jewish, born in 1930 or 1931, and their fathers were in the garment. Trade manufacturers, pressers, sewers. It's almost uncanny. A predictable recipe for success based on these hidden advantages.
Okay, that paints a really compelling picture of Flom's success being tied to very specific, maybe even predictable circumstances around the 1930s, 1970s in New York. But the sources then pivot quite dramatically, don't they? They ask a deeper question. Can cultural legacies influence us long after the original reasons for them disappear, even for centuries?
Exactly. It's about cultural inertia. We've seen culture evolving over, say, 40 years with Flom. Now we look at culture potentially lasting for 400 years. And to do that, we leave New York entirely and go to Harlan County, Kentucky.
Right, in Appalachia, settled way back by Scotch-Irish immigrants from the British borderlands, famous for, well, intense feuds, like the Howards and the Turners.
Infamous, really. Decades of violence, often sparked by things that seem minor to us now, like a dispute over a poker game between Wix Howard and Little Bob Turner.
And that incredible, chilling detail about Will Turner's mother when he got shot.
Yes, snapping at him. Die like a man, like your brother did. It shows a completely different value system at play.
So where did this intense, violent culture come from? It wasn't just random lawlessness.
No, the argument is that it stemmed from a specific cultural inheritance these Scotch-Irish settlers brought with them, the culture of honor. Think about their origins, the remote, often lawless border regions of Britain. And then settling in places like Appalachia, what was their main livelihood? Herding animals.
Livestock, which unlike crops or land, can be stolen very easily.
Exactly. And with little effective law enforcement, your survival, your wealth, depended entirely on your reputation. You had to project strength. You had to make it known that you would react, violently if necessary, to any challenge, any insult, any threat to your property or your family's honor.
So aggression wasn't just personality, it was an economic survival strategy.
It was essential, a rational response to a specific set of environmental and economic conditions. Valuable, easily stolen property, and the absence of reliable state protection.
Okay, that makes sense for the past. But the really mind-bending part is the evidence that this culture still has echoes today, hundreds of years later, right? Tell us about that University of Michigan experiment.
Yeah, the Cohen and Nisbet study is quite famous. They took male students, some from the North, some from the South, whose ancestors were more likely to have come from these honor culture backgrounds. They set up a situation where the student is walking down a narrow hallway and gets bumped and insulted, called an asshole by someone working for the experimenters. They wanted to see how they'd react to this public challenge.
And the difference was significant.
Hugely different. The Northerners, mostly they were amused or just shrugged it off. Physiologically, their cortisol levels, it's a stress hormone, tended to stay level or even decrease slightly. They didn't register it as a real threat to their status.
But the Southerners...
The Southerners reacted very differently. Even these were modern, often middle or upper class college students. Their cortisol levels spiked. Their testosterone levels spiked. Their bodies reacted as if this was a genuine, serious confrontation requiring a response.
They felt their honor was challenged, even in that artificial setting.
It seems so. And it showed up in their behavior, too. They did a follow-up test, the chicken test.
Right, where they had to walk down the hall again, but this time a big guy was walking towards them, taking up space.
The Northerners typically gave way fairly early, maybe moving aside when they were still 5, 6, even 9 feet away. But the Southern students who had been insulted,
They stood their ground longer.
much longer. They got much closer, often less than 2 feet away, practically shoulder to shoulder before yielding. They were playing chicken, asserting themselves, refusing to be seen as backing down after the insult.
Even though the original conditions hurting, lawlessness are completely gone for these students.
Exactly. That's the key point. The economic rationale vanished centuries ago. They live under the rule of law. Yet the cultural script, the culture of honor, still seems to influence their instinctive reactions to insults and challenges.
It shows how deep these cultural legacies can run, shaping behavior long after the reasons make sense.
It really does. These cultural patterns have incredibly long lives, working below the surface, guiding us in ways we might not even realize.
So, wrapping this all up then, looking back at Joe Flom, his incredible success wasn't just him, it was this almost perfect alignment of circumstances.
Absolutely. When you unpack it using these sources, you see it's a product of these predictable, powerful, often hidden forces. Being an outsider pushed him into the right field. Demographic luck cleared his path. And his cultural background, the garment industry heritage, gave him the right tools, the right mindset for the battle ahead.
And the broader takeaway for all of us listening now is that we're all shaped by similar forces, aren't we? Our own time, our place, our cultural baggage. They influence our opportunities, our reactions, probably more than we think.
It definitely encourages you to look beyond the individual and ask, what are the hidden structures, the historical legacies, the demographic quirks that might be shaping opportunities or challenges right now?
Which brings us to a final thought. We mentioned earlier how for Canadian hockey players, being born early in the year, like January or February, is a huge advantage because of age cutoffs in youth leagues. It's like their demographic luck.
Right. Flom's early 1930s birth year was essentially his January 1st for becoming a top New York lawyer. The timing provided those crucial early advantages.
So here's something to think about. What stands out to you? If the early 1930s was the magic window for that generation of lawyers, what might be the equivalent perfect time or hidden advantage, whether it's a birth year, a specific skill set gained from an unexpected place, or a cultural legacy that defines success in your field or maybe the field your kids are heading into today?
It's a fascinating question to ponder.
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us today.